Many people will describe prepping for sermons as a lot of hard work, but it doesn't actually have to be that way. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to give you 5 tips for effortless sermon prep.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. Today we're going to be giving you 5 tips for effortless sermon prep. That's a tall order. Effortless.
Right. We're going to deliver.
They're just going to fly out of you.
And speaking of effortless, before we get into it, if you are in the launch phase of your church, make sure to go to practicalplanting.com/launch to get our Growing Your Launch Team course, because effortless sermon prep is great. But what about effortless growing a launch team? We've
Sign
got
me up.
a workable strategy for you to actually do. So check out practicalplanting.com/launch. Now, X tips for effortless sermon prep. This is not just a clickbaity title. This is
Yeah.
for real. Now, where I get this idea of effortless from is from a book that I think came out this year by Greg McEwen called Effortless.
Effortless.
And the whole thing, I mean, is, in my opinion, the first 2 chapters were the best part. And so we'll read all of it, but that's like where the most impactful thing for me.
Yep.
And he does a lot of stuff on productivity and efficiency. And he has a book called The One Thing, which is about goal setting, which is really helpful. And his whole premise of the book is essentially people who are good at things and get things done often describe it as effortless.
Mm-hmm.
So I even have it on the whiteboard in my office. One of the questions that he asks in the book that you should ask yourself when you're approaching tasks and things you're doing is, how can this be easier?
Mm-hmm.
How can I make this easier? And I guess lots of examples in the book. One of the things that I remember is easy to reiterate is like he gives like free throw examples, or NBA players with free throw percentages and people who don't shoot it as well. And, talking about some of the greatest shooters in the game and how they describe being at the free throw line, and they use things like effortless. They don't think about it. It just goes in.
Yep.
And then if you were to ask people who don't shoot free throws well, if our free throws hard, well, they would probably say, yeah, they're hard because I stink at it.
Yep.
Now, the thing is, shooting a free throw is not any harder or any easier for someone who's good or bad at it. It takes the same amount of effort. So why does the person who's good at it say it feels effortless or feel like in a flow state and that sort of thing? And of course, a lot of it goes to making something effortless. Takes a lot of work. Like, it takes a lot of work and training and practice to shoot free throws well. But once you have done that, the actual act of doing it is not that hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book is about the stuff that you find yourself doing. How do you make it feel effortless so that it's less stressful and so that things happen? And so that's what this episode is about. If you preach regularly, it's not that preaching is not going to be hard work, but you're not going to describe it as quote unquote hard work. It's going to feel somewhat effortless. And there's a lot of things I don't do well, but reading this book, I was like, okay, what are the main things that I do in my week to week, day to day job stuff?
Yeah.
Preaching is one of them. And I wouldn't have the vocabulary before it, but I would say I would say preaching for me, or preaching prep, I should say, seems pretty effortless because a lot of those principles were kind of being applied without me knowing it. Now, there's other things that are not effortless that I've been working on. And so we'll talk about how to get to that state where it doesn't feel every week that there's this big burden, that it's stressful, that I don't know how I'm going to write the sermon. I don't know what to say. Is it going to be any good? How can you get to the state where it actually feels effortless? That's what we're about.
I can't wait to find out.
So here we go. To be clear, this is not that it's not going to take work, but it's not. I don't. For me, I would not describe sermon prep as hard work. Now, if that makes sense, I think I've described it enough at this point. It takes work, but that's not how I would describe it. And how do I get there? How can you get there? Here we go. So here's number 1. Create a consistent schedule. So this first point is going to be probably the longest one. I'm just going to walk you through what mine looks like.
Okay.
It is not the best. It is just what works for me.
It's what works. Yeah.
I would say, do you have a system? A lot of people don't. They just kind of work on the sermon where they can get to it. That's not a system. You need to find something that works for you. My system also was not developed overnight. So especially if you're new to preaching, don't feel overwhelmed with this, because I'm about 4 to 6 weeks out at a time. In fact, I'm like 7 weeks out right now. I'm too far, which actually is a problem because with scheduling and stuff, it's actually can be a problem. So taking an extra week off. But when you hear that, it's like, how does that happen? Well, I didn't wake up one day and say, I want to be 6 weeks ahead of sermon prep.
Done.
It's just through systems and processes is how it happens. So if you're starting from scratch, you just got to start with something and tweak it and work on it. My system is not the best. It's just what works for me. You should have one that works for you. So for me, do this pretty quick. 4 to 6 weeks ahead, here's how it works for me. So Wednesday morning from when I get from about 8:30 to noon is my sermon study and prep for the sermon that's, I don't know, 4 to 5 to 6 weeks ahead. The
Mhm.
one that's far away.
So the one you're working on.
Yep, I use Logos. I don't use paper or physical commentaries anymore, even though I prefer like normal reading, real physical books. I use Logos where you can buy their commentaries, and so it's on the platform, and I don't have to. I can sermon study anywhere.
Mhm.
So I have two screens. I have the Logos up with the Bible verses and the commentaries that I can click through, and then I have my Google Doc / other tabs. I only use two. Whatever people can do differently. For each, we do books of the Bible. I buy two commentaries and that's it. And so I read the commentaries, I study them, some other anecdotal stuff. I'll Google stuff, but I'll study and I'll write a sermon, a rough outline with all of my notes, my commentary notes on a Wednesday, and I'm done by noon. And that's it. That is my cutoff time, 3.5 hours. Which it's not. I'm not saying it's a lot or a little, but I'm just saying if you schedule it in your calendar and have a cutoff time, you're more likely to do it. I don't check email. I don't check social media. I go to the bathroom. That's the only break I get is when I have to go to the bathroom. And I just focus. And then I take that, and then and so then I'm done with that. And then on Mondays, we have, after our staff meeting, we have what's called Message Collab, which is going over a sermon that's probably 3 to 4 weeks ahead of time. So I don't, after I write it on a Wednesday, I don't look at it again until it's that Monday's Message Collab, where I talk through it with the staff. We go over our points, and they give feedback on stories if something's confusing, if they know something that stuck out to them, whatever.
Yeah.
And then, we put the notes in there. I edit the Google Doc a little bit, and then I don't touch it again until Monday week of. So what happens for me Monday morning is I take my Google Doc and I use an iPad. And what I do is I put the text. I have this app. I forget what it's called. It's like $5 or $10 where you can copy and paste the scripture, and I put it in the little app, and then I take my Apple Pencil and all of my notes on all the verses. I write them by hand in my little app on my iPad, which again causes me to write less because I don't always write as much commentary, but it's just stuff I want to remember. And then I print that out on Thursday, which we'll get to in a second. I print that out, and that's what I put in my Bible. It has the sermon, and it has my notes on there, and I just put all that in my Bible. So Monday is reducing my outline and taking my notes and writing them down. Tuesday I go over it out loud, tweak it as needed. And then Thursday, I go over out loud, tweak it as needed. Saturday night, I look it over for 15 minutes. Sunday morning, I look it over for 15 minutes. I don't go over out loud or anything like that, but and then I give it.
And you're done.
And again, that's a process that's taken a long time to get there. So, but that's how I get 4 to 6 weeks ahead now. But it's consistent. So again, we talk about this a lot. Every Wednesday morning, it's sermon prep, no matter what. I don't have to think about it. It's part of what makes it effortless. I don't have to plan. I don't have to be like, oh, I got to do a sermon today. I'm also not prepping a sermon week of. So all of the stress of there is not there.
It's not there.
And because I have a known system, it's not stressful for me. And so I know I'm going to talk through it with the staff in a couple of weeks. And so, which is such a valuable thing, because then if somebody says something that's confusing, you wouldn't have known. You would have just preached it.
Yeah.
Or if people say this is fine, or you have things that you think sound weird and they can tell you if it does or not. So I know it's going to be heard. Not when I talk it over in staff, I don't preach it. So it's not 100% like it's going to be, but they hear pretty much what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So I know it's going to be looked at, and then I know I've got a week to review it. And so every once in a while, it might take me more. I might be thinking about it on a Friday if I still need a story somewhere. But typically, that's how it works. The schedule is the same every week. Wednesday morning, sermon prep. Monday morning, reduce my notes. Monday afternoon, message collab for a future message. Tuesday morning, go over it out loud, tweak my notes. Thursday morning, go over it out loud, tweak my notes. Saturday night, Sunday morning. And I don't think about it.
Yep.
So that's the first one. I don't know if you have any thoughts or feedback on tip one.
My thought is, if you're listening to this for the first time, didn't know anything about a sermon prep, and are new, maybe in your first year of church launch or something like that, that sounds super overwhelming.
It does.
And so I think the only way that this is at all possible is to have a consistent schedule.
Yes.
If you try and say, I'm going to get ahead, maybe we'll be able to get ahead, but I want to do all these things in here, there's no way that you're going to be able to remember them all and also do them consistently unless you have a consistent schedule. Like, there's going to be times you miss things. You're going to accidentally, miss things certain days, and it might mess up that message. It might not mess up the message, but might hurt you in getting ahead. But the only way to kind of do this, which is kind of a little bit more of a complicated process than preparing everything week of, it's much more effective, but it's a little bit more goes into it, I guess you could say. But you're not going to be able to do it without having a schedule set of this is how you're going to do it. If you just kind of say, I'm going to get ahead, I'm just going to kind of wing it, make it happen, it's not going to be an effective way of doing it.
It's funny, like when I tell guys sometimes that I'm 46 weeks ahead, they look at me like, what? But I'm telling you, it's not. It's not hard. It's
Mhm.
just habits and rhythms. And I get that what I might have explained might sound really confusing, that you're like working on multiple messages in one week.
Mhm.
Because I am. I'm on Wednesday. I'm doing a brand new one. Monday afternoon, I'm doing one that's 2 or 3 weeks away. The rest of the week, I'm doing one. But I'm telling you, it's not. It sounds complicated, but to me, it's not, because it's just what I do,
Yeah.
and I've created rhythms, and you can do it too. Whatever works for you, and it will take time. Again, I didn't wake up and get to that space. That took
Mhm.
like 3 years probably to where I got to that. But it's consistent, and I don't think about it, and that's what's most important. It sounds, again, it might sound like that schedule is overwhelming, but I promise you, if you are doing week of every week, it is more overwhelming for you than
Oh
it is
yeah.
for me.
Oh yeah.
It's not stressful for me. Now, that being said, if the sermon isn't great, like the week of sermon that I'm prepping, like I feel that and I want it to be better. So it's not that I don't care,
Mhm.
but the sense of I don't know what I'm going to preach, and I'm worried about, if some emergency happens, am I going to have time? That never happens. I literally never worry about if I'm going to have our sermon on Sunday,
Yeah.
which is great. And if you, that's how you, part of how you do that is setting a consistent schedule, tweak it. If you're not sure when works best for you, that's fine. I would say start a schedule and then you try it for a month or two and then tweak something else. But you got to start somewhere and make it consistent.
And we mentioned this in a previous episode, but one of the things you've said that you've heard, one of the kind of rebuttals to this that you've heard a bunch is people being worried that they'll have that working in multiple messages in one week,
Yeah.
have more than one kind of idea or message in their head when it comes to Sunday. And I would say that could happen if you're not following a good schedule.
Yeah.
Like if you're just each day, maybe I'll work on the one in the future, maybe I'll kind of prep for this coming week, and you kind of have this mix of not sure which each day is going to be, then I could see it getting confusing in your head. But if you know, like, this day I'm doing this one, this day I'm doing this one, they're not going to bleed into each other if you have a plan of what you're going to work on. Where they're going to bleed in is when you're kind of thinking about both at the same time and unsure which one to go and work on, and then they kind of just meld together. So have a schedule, and I think that'll kind of get rid of this worry about mixing up messages and kind of letting them bleed into each other.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, when I started on this getting ahead a couple years ago, one of the people I was listening to that like talked about how they got ahead there. So one of the benefits of this is that it gives you more time to let the sermon simmer and to think about it and to think of stories. And I was like, well, that's good. More time. The reality is I don't think about them at all until week of.
Yeah.
I'll write it on Wednesday, don't think about it. And then we go over a message collab. I'm like, what do I say here?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah. Okay. So I don't, and then I forget about it again until week of. So I don't, in my experience, it's not really a problem. I know that's like people are kind of nervous about that. It's only a benefit because you know what's coming up, and so it allows you to preach and to do certain things, knowing you're going to hit certain things later, or making sure you're not doing the same points every week because you
Yeah.
know what's coming up. That's really helpful. So, but number one, by and far, I think the best thing you can do, one of the best things you can do to make your sermon prep effortless, is to make it consistent. Even if you're not ahead yet, knowing when you're going to do it, so you're not wondering about, am I going to have time, when I'm going to get to it. It is a priority if you preach regularly to, this is when I'm going to do it, and you're working. Don't let the fact that you feel like you have a flexible schedule, which we talked about last episode, stop you from putting it on your calendar and not moving it.
Yep.
So number one, create a consistent schedule. It'll make it feel a lot more effortless. Number two, we talked about a little bit, get ahead.
Get ahead. Yep.
We said this all the time. We said this in the last message, last podcast. And so if you're still like on the fence about it, I would just say try it. But let me just tell you, what if you woke up on Monday morning every week and didn't have to wonder, what am I going to preach this Sunday? That
Yeah.
takes a massive load off, and it makes it feel way more effortless. Now, of course, again, for me, I'm going to tweak it and work on it, and sometimes the sermon I know in my mind is not going to be as good, so that can weigh heavy on you during the week. How can I, make this better and that sort of thing? But there is no question in my mind. Like, it would not be great, but if I had to, I could take my notes on a Monday morning before I've even messed with them and preach that sermon. It wouldn't be the best thing ever,
Right.
but I could. And so knowing that you have it, and if there's like an emergency, so for example, if something happens or something's going on and or maybe I have a really full week and I just don't have time to do sermon prep. Well, Wednesday morning, 3.5 hours just opened up because I have now half a day where I don't have to work on a sermon and do a sermon study, if you will, because I'm already ahead so far. And so it frees up time if you have weeks where you have more going on, that you don't have to worry about it. Or, when I go out I don't go out of town often, but maybe for an Acts 29 thing or a conference or a pastor's gathering or whatever, and people will say, are you preaching this week? And, ideally, sometimes people try to take the week off when they go out of town because they can't sermon prep study. And I try to do that, but you can't always. And so people will be like, yeah, I'm preaching. And And it's funny to me when I say, yeah, I'm preaching, but it's not a big deal. So
Yeah.
like, we go to the Acts 29 assessments or something else I did recently, and most of them weren't preaching, but some of them were, and I was too. But it wasn't a big deal for me because if I'm out of town, I don't have to do sermon study, that Wednesday thing. And then it's already written. So let's say I go out of town on a Monday afternoon. Well, my Monday morning sermon prep is already done.
Yep.
And I can come back and I can push it back. I can do Friday and Saturday out loud.
Mhm.
Or I typically do it this way. Sunday afternoon, I'll do my notes reduction. Monday morning, I'll go over out loud once. And then when I come back Thursday or Friday, I'll do my out loud again. And I just move my parts around.
Yeah.
Because it's only about hour and a half every time. Well, the first time's an hour and a half. When I go through it out loud, it's not as long, but I still tweak it, so it takes some time. But anyway, I just move the parts around because I already have a schedule. And it makes it effortless. So getting ahead, that's just one of the benefits of it. Just get ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you're like, how do I get ahead? I was thinking the exact same thing you said. What would happen if you went out of town for during the week, not a weekend, and you couldn't have anyone come in and preach? Like, if you weren't ahead, what do you do?
Saturday night special.
Saturday night special, exactly. Which means taking away time that you weren't planning to be working from your family
and stressing out
during the week. Yeah,
That you
not being
haven't
able to enjoy the vacation.
Yeah.
So like, if you were doing that, you would probably try and get a week ahead. Like, hopefully you'd have enough forethought to think, I'm gonna be gone next week. Maybe I'm gonna try and cram in 2 messages this week and get it written and be able to be a week ahead. So why not just do that regardless? Like, why not just set that precedent of I'm gonna be at least a week ahead to cover for these areas? And I was thinking after we talked about this in the last episode, if you had someone coming in, if you had maybe a staff member who's learning to preach, or you're trying to give more opportunities to, or a resident or something like that, someone who doesn't preach every week, and they were prepping for the message, and they said, I'm going to wait to prep it until the week I'm giving it. You would tell them that's terrible. That's a terrible idea. Now, obviously they're newer. They're not as experienced as you, but you would tell them, you don't have a message to preach every week. So why would you wait until the last minute to prep it? When in reality, we all don't need to wait until the last minute to prep it. Like, neither do you. If you're, especially if you're in your first, year, 2 years, like, look, you're all great. We're all great. You're not that good. Like, you can get ahead, or you can spend more time on it by getting further ahead and not waiting until the last minute. So if that's the advice we give to someone who's a little less experienced, then I think that should apply to us as well. Like, you don't need to wait until the last minute to write something, to preach it. The Holy Spirit can work in your preparedness, and get ahead, and it'll save yourself a lot of stress and a lot of headache down the road, and it'll make things a lot more efficient.
Yep.
Get ahead.
Number 2, get ahead. Number 3, talk through your sermon with others ahead of time. So this also makes like my Wednesday morning study prep less stressful, because I know if this sounds weird, someone else is going to hear it, or if I know I need like story illustrations, people can give me ideas. Like, I don't have this pressure of, if I was preaching it this Sunday, I'd have to write the sermon, figure everything out, and hope that it sounds good.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of the pressure off of your initial getting things ready. Now, people do this differently. Some people actually maybe preach the whole message. We've tried it differently. Some people maybe have people like study the passage themselves, and you can kind of come together. I wouldn't. Maybe it works for different people. I wouldn't recommend that, because you're the one that has to give the sermon anyway. What I have found, at least what I like the most, so it's what we do, is I write the sermon myself, and I just talk through it, and people give their feedback on it, as opposed to trying to have people give what they think you should say, because in the day you got to preach it, and so it just can be hard. But having a process of, and it can just be one person. It can just be one person, and that can be. But there's been times when people were out of town, or whatever. So I just talked through my message with Brian.
Yep.
And it's fine, but it allows you to go over it again out loud, and so that can maybe some of the things that I have found myself, even as I'm talking through, I'm like, that doesn't sound good, which I don't have to wait till wake up, because I've already seen that. So talking through with others, all that to say, and it's not just to make yourself feel better, but it's to get real good feedback, and it takes the stress away of wondering, is this weird or not? Is this illustration appropriate or not? Because I know I'm going to get feedback. So trying to find a way, even if it's just one person. If you don't have a lot of people to do this with, I wouldn't recommend doing it with your spouse, just because, I don't know, it's good to have some separateness there and not feel like they have to. I mean, maybe to start, unless they really want to. I mean, maybe your spouse really enjoys this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I know Christina would not really, I mean, she would give good advice, but it wouldn't be a good thing for me to make her give me advice every week on a sermon that I'm going to preach. So ideally a friend, you have at least somebody you can talk through. And people like this. This is also a leadership development opportunity for people, especially people that you might want to preach in the future, that they can kind of hear how you process things. So talk through your sermon ahead with others.
Yeah, this is super helpful. I mean, like you said, whether it's one person that's just a volunteer, and if you don't have a staff, if you're not sure who to ask, if you ask some people that are pretty committed to your church, I think people would be, I don't know if honored is the right word, but like I think people would feel good that you would that you'd want their opinion that much that you'd want to go over a message with them, especially if they've never been in ministry before. Like, and I think that's a good thing. And so, get some, whether it's key leaders or staff members or volunteers that you trust, and whether it's one person or a few, but going over your message every week really helps iron out things that are confusing, things that you obviously did way more research and learned a lot more than they did going into this. And so sometimes you can over communicate or have too much information and you don't really realize it until you go over it with somebody, and then they can point out like, dude, you've been talking about this for so long. But it's really helpful. And it doesn't mean, obviously, it's not like every piece of advice someone gives you have to take, but it helps to walk through it with somebody so you can figure out where the bumps are, where things you're not really explaining well are, where, if you have stories or illustrations where they connect well or where they just don't really make any sense. Or if you don't have any, people can help identify those for you. Mm-hmm. And it's just, man, regardless of your experience in ministry, I don't see us stopping this anytime soon. Like it's really helpful. It's helpful for you as the pastor. It's helpful as you're bringing up like residents and staff members that'll be preaching. It's helpful for them to get in the habit as well. And it's just it's good for everybody.
Yeah, it's like you were saying with the last point. If you're new to preaching, you would have, if you have someone at your church who's never preached before, is new to it, you would have them go over it.
Yep.
So you should too. Or you'd have them plan ahead.
Yeah.
You also would have them go over it so they can get feedback. And so why not do it yourself as well? Now with this one, I would also say, make it consistent. Do it the same time every week. Don't be moving it around, because that's not helpful. Even though it doesn't take a lot of, maybe as much brain power as working on a sermon, because it's already kind of there.
Yeah.
For your schedule, it needs to be consistent every week. And also, if you don't plan ahead, you can't do this. Like, I would not recommend writing a sermon on Monday and Tuesday, talking through with someone on Thursday, and then trying to fix everything.
Yeah, that's true.
This only really works if you're at least 1 week ahead. Mm-hmm. And so this point doesn't work well if you're not ahead, because then it's just, sometimes you could, especially if there's a lot that needs to be changed, trying to do it all over again is just not fun.
Yep.
Especially when you got to give it a couple days.
Yeah, 100%. So, make sure to go over it with other people.
Yep, that's number 3. Number 4, plan your series out ahead of time. So this also helps with, what am I going to preach this week? Now, also,
do people come down to what am I going to preach this week? That sounds terrible. Like, if you don't know what you're going to preach that coming Sunday, I don't get it.
This also helps if you do books of the Bible, because it's a little bit easier. So what we do, we just started the book of Mark. Now, book Mark's a longer one.
Yep.
But I Googled all over the place and looked online and asked what people have done and what their outlines were, to give you a rough outline. So we have through November, so like 3 months, and we'll take a big break from it. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to follow that exact outline, but at least I know what to expect, and generally speaking, what I'm going to look at. That way, because there's nothing worse too than, even if you're doing a book of the Bible, sitting down to do your sermon prep and you're not even sure how many verses you're going to do. Am I going to do 8? Am I going to do 12? Am I going to do 16? Because that affects the flow of the sermon, how many points that you have. And so knowing ahead of time before that initial sermon prep thing, whatever you want to call it, helps you. It's just like we said in the previous episode, if you set a schedule and you put things on your schedule, you're not wondering what you have to do next. Wednesday morning, I'm not really wondering, how many verses should I read? Now, sometimes, again, we're going through Mark, and so I have a rough outline, and so I'll read all the verses, maybe read a couple quick things and say, hey, can I fit however many of these verses in a time period? But then I just go for it. And I'm not wondering how much to preach every week, because that could be difficult as well. So planning your series out ahead of time is a big thing.
Yeah, the way we do this is we have a Google Sheet. We live on Google whatever apps. But that's just our teaching calendar, and it's gone back since the beginning of time. And it's just shows like what's coming up and what we've done, passage, scripture wise. And so right now we have it planned through the end of November, which is the end of this like run of the series, and then we're going to take a break. And obviously like some verses may change as you actually get to like prepping them of this would work better, this verse would work better if I pulled it into the previous week or push it off, whatever. But we have a general idea of this is what the rest of this series is going to look like, verse by verse. And it really helps for planning. It helps if you want to bring someone in to preach, whether it's like a staff member or kind of a guest preacher, whatever. You can tell them, this is your passage. Please preach this. Unless they're like doing their own thing. But like if they're open to preaching what you're in the series you're doing, then this is the passage you're preaching. And it's way easier than telling them, well, I'll let you know in a couple weeks once we get there, and I got to figure it out still. But you already know, even if it's a couple weeks or a couple months down the road, this is the portion that you're going to be preaching, and it helps people to know ahead of time, and it helps your staff to know. So we have it shared with all staff that like needs access, and people can know where we're going to be and don't have to wait every week when we go to message collab of what are we doing this week? Are we still in Mark? Which, what's kind of going on? We have a general idea of where we're headed, and that way everyone can just be on the same page.
Yep. So this one might sound simple, but at least a couple of weeks out, even if you're doing like a topical series, know exactly what the topic is going to be each week. Put it on a sheet where people can kind of see and that sort of thing. It's also helpful too because we have a Google sheet. I think it says the series, the passage, who's preaching, and like there's any sermon specials. So knowing, hey, there's a baptism this week. We do communion once a month, so it's a communion Sunday. Or we do a special video that's in the teaching calendar, so that when you prepping the sermon, or at least when you're going over it with Message Collab and that sort of thing, like how many songs are we going to do this week, and is there any other special elements to tie into the sermon, which helps again getting ahead and knowing what's coming up, so you can be strategic about talking about certain things if there's something in your church that's happening.
Yep.
At that same time. So I'll just say plan ahead, don't do week by week. That'll also make it seem a lot more effortless.
And like you said, if you're unsure, like especially if you're preaching through books of the Bible, if you're doing topical, you kind of just figure it out on your own. But if you're preaching through books of the Bible, just look up what other people do. There's nothing wrong with that. Like
that's what we do.
And so like have that as your kind of rough outline or rough like idea. And as you're going through, obviously, like I said, if you need to tweak a little bit. But in my opinion, I mean, as someone who hasn't, tried to preach through an entire book on my own without looking at what anyone else is doing or whatever.
Yep.
That sounds like way more honestly like work than it's worth to just say like we're preaching through Mark and now I got to go through on my own time and read through all and map out, every chapter or every week. Like why? Just look at what other people have done, copy it in. Obviously, you're not copying their message, but just like their outline of what they do each week, and then tweak it as need be. But that way, you at least just have like a rough thing to go on, and you can start. That's just kind of a jumping off point for you.
And if you're listening to this or watching this, which you literally are, you have a great resource for this, as you may not know, and that's the Practical Church Planting Facebook group.
Yeah.
Just say, hey, I'm preaching through this book. What was your outline?
Yep.
And hear people say, because our Bibles have the sectional things that they do, like the headers, but sometimes those aren't too long or too short, and so you can't really just go by those. Like we're going through Mark, and some of those things are 3 or 4 verses each.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't want to be in Mark for 2 years, so you can't really go off of that. And so it's helpful to see what other people have done and kind of go from there.
Yeah, Practical Church Planting Facebook group, and it's full of church planters, but also church planters that have planted churches a long time ago. So I remember you asked one time like what anyone had done for the book of Amos, I think it was, or something along those lines.
I was asking for a 7-week series. Was that? I don't know.
Maybe that's what it was.
Has anyone done his book in 7 weeks?
Yes, and someone gave like an outline of Amos, like, and so like, it's a good place to ask. And so
maybe it was Amos. I don't know, but we've done it.
Yeah.
I've done it.
Yep.
So you can too. And then last but not least, for an effortless sermon prep, invest in your setup. So you're going to spend a lot of time on this, so you should spend some money on it. It's kind of like people say, if you spend 1/3 of your life sleeping, you should probably buy a bed. That is decent.
That's good.
I mean, I know it feels weird and it kind of stinks because nobody likes spending money on a bed, but you're there all the time, so don't buy $100 bed. If you can, that's my encouragement.
Yeah.
So this has changed for me, but 2 monitors is helpful for me. Like I said, I use Logos. I don't use Logos. I've started to use it a little bit for their language stuff because we use the CSB, and for the longest time, how I have it set up was basically I have the full screen, right? And so on 1/3 of the screen, I have 2 Bibles. So I have like they're on top of each other. So the top part of it is linked directly with my commentary. So as I'm scrolling through, my commentaries like follow the verses, so I don't have to like scroll through all of them.
Yeah.
And the bottom one is not linked to my commentary, so I can scroll up and down, and it doesn't change the place on there.
Is it 2 CSBs or 2 different translations?
It's 2 CSBs.
Okay.
But the one that is linked to my commentary, I have multiple Bibles, so if I can I can see how other translations have done it if I'm curious about it. Why am I saying this? Oh, so the CSB until recently on Logos, you couldn't do word studies on it. I don't know why. You could do like the ESV and stuff, and I'm like, I don't use that sometimes. Regardless, so I use that, and then I'll just say I don't really use Logos for its power. I just use it because I like that you can buy all the commentaries through it, and then you can link them up. And so every Wednesday morning, I just open up Logos, I do my Mark study one, and you can Google how to do it, YouTube how to do it, because I'm not very efficient at it, but I have a setup that works for me. So, but buy software that might make it more efficient. I have a standing desk now, which I love, and I feel like I focus better when I'm standing up. I've even bought, this past year I bought a mechanical keyboard, the ones that's like, an office, clickety, clickety, click.
Yep.
And it's just random stuff like that. So I don't know if there's certain lighting you want. If there's, sermon prep might not always be the most fun, even though you might enjoy it. And so if there's a certain beverage that you want to drink that makes it more fun. I don't always do this, although I got some gift cards and then I didn't use them. And then I got another gift card. And so Jersey Mike's is like my favorite thing. So I've been going through these gift cards and now I've got all these points. I'll get free subs for like the next 2 months. It's
Nice.
awesome. I don't know how this happened. I just I lost a card. I found it. And if I wanted to. So like sometimes what I'll do is on Wednesday, I'll go to Jersey Mike's near us and I'll go to Jersey Mike's. As like when I'm done with my sermon prep, it helps me look forward to it.
Yeah.
So whether it's something small or just your desk setup, I would invest in a way that helps it be more efficient and more enjoyable to you because you're going to be using it a lot.
Yep. I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add, but it's somewhere that you're going to be a lot, especially if you have control over it. Like
Right.
I get if you're portable and you got to work in coffee shops or something like that, maybe figure out something else other than coffee shops. But
Yeah.
it's if you have control, as much as you have control over, have it be somewhere you enjoy, and and don't let. Obviously, you can't like do everything you ever wanted budget wise potentially, but there are things that you could ask people like in your congregation for. Like I've gotten multiple free second monitors to the point where I have like a choice, and then I've given others away. Like people give away monitors
Yep.
all the time. So I mean, obviously a monitor is cheap regardless, but that's just an example.
Life changing. I don't know why I didn't do this until like a year ago.
I tried setting up 3 monitors recently because like I had 2, and then someone was giving away another one that was better than the second one I had. So I was like, what if I do 3? And I was like, this is too much. But whatever works for you. Whether it's like a rise, like you have a riser for your whatever it's called, laptop. So it's more
So
high level.
Yeah.
Or different keyboards or different lighting or putting up more walls if you don't have your own space, so you can be more private. Whatever it is, just figure out what helps you work a little bit more efficiently, or just enjoy being there more.
Yeah.
And do it. Yeah.
Yep.
That's about it.
So again, going back to the free throw example, Steve Nash, when that book was written, which was this year, so I think it's still true. He is I believe, the all-time highest free throw percentage shooter. And he had interviews in him and how he describes used the word effortless.
Yeah.
He wouldn't say he would not say shooting free throws is hard work, I don't think. And then you got, people that shoot 50% or 40%, they would probably describe to you as hard work and unenjoyable. The same thing described 2 completely different ways. So doing these things does not mean it's not going to be work, but I don't think you would call it hard and stressful work.
Yeah.
Because it's not. So again, if you have a consistent schedule and you're ahead, talk through your sermon with others, you plan your series out ahead of time, and you invest in your setup to where it's efficient or enjoyable or good for you, it'll still be an effort, but it won't feel like this heavy weightiness to it. And so again, for us, we said 5 tips for effortless sermon prep. It's not that you don't have to try, but it's not going to feel maybe as heavy and as stressful as it does right now.
Yep.
And that's the point.
Yep. You want it to be effortless and enjoyable. Like it's a good thing that you're prepping a sermon. It shouldn't be something you dread. So do these things to make it a little more enjoyable.
Again, the question that Greg McEwen talks about in his book is, how can I make this easier? Or how could this be easier? How could this be easy? That's the question. And I think some of these things, however it works for you, can help you get to that place.
Exactly.
So thanks for listening. Again, if you're in the launch phase of your church and you're also looking for an effortless launch team plan that you can actually do,
That's right.
practicalplanning.com/launch. And if you just want a bunch of free resources, practicalplanning.com. There's a bunch of stuff on that side. So thanks for listening, and we'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting.